IVM.
There's a quick survey to fill out on ivmpodcast.com/survey. It lets us know a little bit more about who's listening to us. And you know what? We're going to do a few prizes. So, we'll do a random drawing of maybe 10 people and we'll send you all some swag. Remember, that's ivmpodcast.com/survey where you can fill out the survey.
Welcome to All Things Policy, a daily podcast supported by Pragati, a flagship media initiative of the Takshashila Institution. We're a bunch of policy nerds based in Bengaluru, and we like to bring a fresh perspective to Indian affairs and an Indian perspective to global affairs. So grab a cup of coffee, sit back, and join us for today's chat.
Hi, hello, and welcome to another episode of All Things Policy. I'm Harshit Kukreja, and today as a guest, we have Mahek Nankani, who is my colleague at Takshashila and works at Policy School. So, Mahek, how are you?
I'm good, Harshit. How are you?
All good, all good. So, Mahek, before we start, could you tell us about our GCPP courses?
Yeah. So I know listeners would have heard this before in the previous episodes, but someone who's tuning up for our episode for the first time, I'd like to tell them that Takshashila Institution runs these 12-week cohort-based courses in public policy, and we have 3 streams running around. First is advanced public policy, second is tech and policy, and the third is defense and foreign affairs. So the applications for next cohort are now open. And the last date to submit the application is 30th of April, and the next cohort begins from 7th of May. And for further details, please check school.takshashila.org.in.
That was a full-blown brand integration.
Yes, marketing.
So today in this podcast, we'll talk about water scarcity. We'll talk about how water scarcity links to gender and education in India. So, Mahek, the planet is getting warmer. Extreme weather events are getting more common. And I think we are looking at a changed future in which water consumption patterns are also changing, and how water is distributed throughout the globe is changing. So how will this scenario affect India as a country?
First of all, we need to realize that water crisis and extreme weather patterns and which lead to water crisis also is a global phenomenon. But at the same time, we need to realize that there are countries and there are populations which get deeply impacted with the water crisis. Of course, developed countries have better access to more resources and they have better resources to use their water efficiently. India, which has a larger population and which also has limited amount of water resources, is of course going towards a major water crisis. We have heard cases of Chennai every year facing a water crisis. People have to stand in lines for just a bucket of water. And that's, of course, common in a lot of parts of the country. We know drought events are becoming more and more prone. They're more and more, they're happening in a more frequently and for a larger point of time. And we know even the rainfall patterns are changing. So even if we think about things like rainwater harvesting or water consumption or water protection, it's not happening at the moment.
I read a Niti Aayog report. It painted quite a bleak picture. It said that by 2030, India's water demand will be 2 times its supply. So we'll have a demand which is 2 times what we have. So that sounds super scary. So do you think how plausible is that? Or will we make some changes to our consumption and some changes to how we use water?
See, what you are talking about talks about behavioral change, human behavioral change, and we have seen it in history. It's a difficult thing to do, and especially when the population is growing, people's demands and needs for water are growing. So I think it's very, very possible that the demands will increase to whatever times than it's now, and we'll have a situation where a large population of people, of course, people who cannot afford water will or probably become costlier, or there will be some here and there taxes on it. So we know that people who particularly belong to a certain economic status of the society will not be able to afford water. And that's how it will impact them the most. I'm not saying it will not impact the people from other society. It's a problem that will affect one and all, at least someday. But I think the populations which are more vulnerable because of whatever economic societal discrimination will be more affected with water crisis in very near future. And we are seeing it also. And I think in towards the end of the podcast, we'll also realize how water is actually related to class and caste and gender and how all of these social hierarchies play an important role.
I get your point about water affecting the vulnerable population, the vulnerable strata more as compared to the other people. But yeah, that's all right. That is what I get. But what I wanted to ask is, do you see a question in which what predictions we are making, what prediction government, Niti Aayog is basically government think tank. So what Niti Aayog is making, and that is somewhere around 6-7 years. So if we are two times the demand, if the supply is like half the demand, I think it would not only affect, it will maybe the poor will find it very difficult to survive in this country.
Of course. And of course, we know water is basic and it's a necessity for to survive. And in coming years, since there are more climate prone events, and of course, we know the water sources are drinking waterable water sources are reducing day by day. So we know that in coming future, there will be a crisis and there will be a large number of people from the country who will be suffering from it. So I think what the report also wants to talk about it that right now is the time to act. And I also believe that at that moment, and I don't want to sound very pessimistic about the fact, but I think climate change and the consequences of it is a very inevitable phenomenon. It has to happen. What currently we can do is probably delay that consequence.
I think I disagree on that. So do you remember the ozone crisis when we were
Yes,
looking
yes,
at
I
a
do.
very real possibility of an increasing sort of a ozone hole, and we were using CFCs, we were using a lot of compounds which were directly responsible for depletion of ozone, and all kinds of predictions were made that how the half the globe will not have ozone layer, maybe 6 months in the year, and how it will change how humanity like survives and everything else. But we saved the ozone. I think it's now closed a lot. It only open 2-3 months a year, the ozone hole, and that too the size has decreased, and it is now limited to somewhere. I don't remember. I'm not very sure, but I think somewhere around Antarctica, the South Pole. So I think
I
uh,
think, Harshit, what you are talking about right now is a very limited consequence. What I was referring to in general was like consequences of climate change. And we know that over the decades, we have digressed and we have crossed most planetary boundaries. We know that there are now more limited sources of water. Of course, we have found a ways around all of these things and we are trying new technologies to figure out, but we still at that point in stage where we cannot make water, and there have been experiments which have been done in other country through clouds or through other things, but I think it's still not possible. So what I am trying to say is that we are in an epoch, we live these are anthropogenic activities which have been happening for over centuries now, and we have done enough destruction. So of course, the climate and nature is also going towards another level of equilibrium and it's trying to achieve that. I think what we need to do at the moment is trying to uh, stop that equilibrium happening from now, because if nature goes to one point of balance and it's very difficult to reverse it back. But I think we will never be able to go back to what we were at the moment. And now what we should move towards is probably delaying the consequences and lowering down the global temperature.
no, Meg, I agree with you that obviously the conditions will change, nature, sort of everything, the temperatures will stabilize in accordance with in what we emit. But what I meant to say was that we have, uh, when we started the podcast, it was, we had painted a very bleak picture. So I was just pointing out to our humanity's sort of recent successes in reversing or changing inevitable futures. So obviously,
No, I what I was hinting like that we know there is a day each year when we decide, okay, we have used all of our Earth's resources for that particular year. Earlier, that the date used to be in September and October. Now it's actually preponing, and every year we are seeing it in probably July last. Even like in during COVID in 2020, but for a couple of months we said that okay, air pollution levels were declining, and now of course it's gotten back. But even in that year, we actually exhausted all of Earth's resources for that particular year by the end of August or July. And I think whatever we use for the last couple of months, it's what we are borrowing from the next year or probably borrowing from the future generations. So what I am saying, what I want to hint that climate change is a very real phenomenon. It's happening, and now it's the time to act and probably build a better sustainable future for upcoming generations.
Yeah, it's like high time we do have to act. But yeah, we have to plan mitigation strategies. We'll have to
Yes,
see
yes,
how we can reduce our consumption, see how we can better
correct.
use water. Yeah, that is that.
And
That
I
is
think
a
you
very
mentioned a very good point that we don't have to adapt, we have to mitigate. And
yeah.
that's the right word that I keep saying to everyone. It's everyone keeps saying that we need to adapt to whatever is happening. And I was like, more than adaptation, mitigation is better way of going about it.
Yeah, for instance, if you look at water crisis, you cannot, because we have national boundaries and we, from the last few thousand years, humans have settled in at places, we cannot move according to changing water patterns or rainfall patterns. That is very difficult with the huge population we have. And we cannot say that Deccan area, the Nagpur area now has less rainfall. Let us move all these people, or the people would say, let us move upwards to the north or downwards to the south. That is not
Yeah,
plausible, and that
correct.
is
And
not.
then, yeah, I was saying climate change consequences are not similar. I know everyone keeps saying that global temperatures are rising, which is true, which is actually true. It's happening across the world. But I think also climate change consequences are very different from one geography to another. Like a lot of places in India are becoming more drought prone, but we also know that and the temperatures are rising. It's becoming even like places in India which didn't need AC at one point in time are now needing AC and know that the temperature rise. But we also know that a lot of places in Europe will probably go towards an ice age, and that will be a ultimate consequence of climate change. So the consequences are different, and I think we have to think and act locally also, so that the consequences are visible globally. So that's the point I wanted to make.
That is, yeah. So coming back to the water crisis. So when you look at urban slum or a rural area, you'll whenever you'll go and whenever you'll read, you'll see that all picture of people carrying water have women up there. There's no male member carrying water. There's always a female, the family, maybe a teenager or maybe someone as young as 9 or 10, and they'll have a utensil, a matka or something, which they'll have in their hand or on their head. So it's a very, even looking at those pictures, you can see that water crisis and water availability is and will disproportionately affect women because they
Yeah,
have the primary responsibility of collecting water for household use. They basically have the responsibility of household chores. So that translates somewhere into the responsibility of getting water.
see, that's true. Like fetching water for both individual and the household needs has always been a gendered task. And it's not only true for India, it also holds true for all developing nations across the world that fetching water, walking kilometers every day is a task which is given to women and girls. And now that we know that climate change is happening, and the sources of water are becoming more further from the household. So we know that it is the women and these young girls who have to walk more and more kilometers every day and spend hours walking to get that water. And there have been, of course, various studies. And even if you see that the latest census, which was done in 2011, you could still see that there is still a lot of distance between the household and the nearest source of water. And past 10-12 years, of course, there have been a lot of initiatives and schemes made by the government to provide drinking potable water to the nearest point as possible. But there are still places in India where women walk kilometers every day, spend hours every day to get that water. And even after spending so much time and energy, there's no complete possibility that the water that they get is very clean. Of course, the possibilities are always very slim. And I think we also know that carrying water for hours and carrying pots for hours is a very physically draining process. And it, of course, impacts the energy levels of these women and girls carrying. So they're not able to spend their time on other things, which are probably also important for their individual and holistic development.
So, Mahek, one thing I would like to point out. So, the water scarcity we have been facing, even if climate change was not there, we would still be facing this because we are consuming
Yeah.
more and consumption patterns are changing, and we do not adjust to local conditions. For instance, we grow rice at places which have droughts. So that does not make sense. If you're growing crops which are so they demand so much water at a place which has no water, that is not a very rational thing to do. So even if there was no climate change, we would have been facing a water crisis. And there are a lot of places in India which have seasonal droughts. That is like the situation at that place for thousands of years. But people who lived there earlier, who lived sort of traveled from one place to another according to the change in temperatures and water availability, they had adapted that. But because of growing populations and people settling down and introduction of agriculture, we do not have that thing now. We people don't usually, a small minority does, but I think almost all of the population of the country is settled in one place. People don't move, no longer move according to changes in weather and stuff.
I think, Harshit, first of all, that's a very general statement to make. I know there are a lot of tribes which still do shifting on a
Make
seasonal
mostly.
basis.
I said mostly. I don't think tribes make the tribes which change their places according to climate, according to change in weather patterns. I don't think they make more than 5-7% of the whole population. They do not exceed
Also,
that.
I think we also were talking about how climate change is inducing more and more droughts, and that's why the sources of water are getting further from the house. Of course, there have been a lot of talk about the area of Kutch in Gujarat has been a drought-prone area forever. It's not like droughts have become common as of now. It has been there, and people had gotten used to it, and they also that's why they don't grow a lot of water-inducing crops. They only grow crops which need hardly any water.
Like there are a lot of places which the weather is such that they have some seasons of drought. That is not. I think Kutch, the increasing droughts in Kutch are mainly because of human activity and obviously because of climate change. But there are a lot of areas for instance, Kutch also has some weeks or I think some months where there is lack of water, and that is has been there for like hundreds of years. That is not because of
Exactly, that's my point. No,
human.
exactly, that's my point. And that's what I
Yeah,
said. Kutch has been facing drought forever. It's not like Kutch is facing drought for now. But what I am saying is, I'm not saying droughts are the only reason. I am just saying climate change is inducing droughts and which also leads to limited water sources and the population is increasing. So we know that the distance between the household and the
yeah,
nearest source of clean potable drinking water is increasing.
yeah.
And that's why, since fetching water or carrying water pots is a gendered based task, that's what I'm saying. Water scarcity impacts women in the ways that it doesn't impact men in those ways. That was my point. And the energy and the time that they spend in getting this water for the individual and the domestic needs, they don't have time or energy left for other things, which I was coming to the next point was the school education. Since young girls end up getting this responsibility of carrying water pots, and whatever time they have, it's spent there. They don't get a chance to probably go to school. And even if they're enrolled in school, and that's why we know that there have been studies which show that there is a lot of absenteeism and there is a lot of school dropout of girls. So, water crisis impacts gender in more than one ways that we can imagine.
Yeah, obviously. So previously, maybe what a teenage girl spent 4 hours getting water for her house. Now she has to spend 6 hours,
Yes.
and
Yes.
she has to travel more. She has to carry those heavy utensils filled with water. So she gets tired. She's not able to concentrate, and you cannot expect people who lack basic facilities like drinking water and water access in general to have that kind of superhuman energy and focus and go to school and work, and
Yeah.
that is not expected of people. Obviously,
And
that
even
is
when
not
the girls are very young and mothers actually travel to get water, we know that these young girls are put in responsibility of taking care of the infants or even younger children or probably even cattle. So we know that whatever responsibility then it falls on the girls, and that's why even from a young age it's very difficult for them to attend the schools regularly, which also denies them and deprives them of an opportunity to make a better future for themselves, because education, we all know, is one of the biggest supplements for one's growth and development.
So it's a double whammy. Either you go and get water and you cannot study, or either you stay at home and take care of your younger
Yeah.
siblings or the household.
Yeah.
That is how water scarcity is impacting girls' education. So before we continue, Meg, I think we should take a short break. So listeners, we'll continue this discussion after a short break.
Hey everybody, it's been another great week on the IBM Podcast Network. On Advertising is Dead, content strategist Manish Pandey shares useful insights about the creator economy with Varun. On The Longest Constitution, it's an Ambedkar special. Priya tells us about the father of the Indian Constitution. On Shunya One, Sheila Ditya asks Mihir Gupta, CEO and co-founder of Teachment, about his dream of changing the Indian education system. On Big Talk About Tiny Humans, Devi Shobha and Meghna share how to navigate the delicate process of LGBTQIA kids coming out to their parents. And on Tere Mere Raste, Kesho takes us to the birthplace of so many great films, Universal Studios. Do follow us on social media. We're IVM Podcasts on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. And remember, if you enjoyed this show or any of our other shows for that matter, do please tell a friend. Also, don't forget to rate us on any of the platforms you're listening to us on. You can check us out on YouTube as well. On ivmpodcast.com/YouTube, we have a list of all of our YouTube channels. Do check out if your favorite show is available as full video. We are also doing a small listener survey to better understand how you respond to our shows and advertising on the network. We'd really appreciate it if you could spare a few minutes to fill it out. It helps us build better shows for you. And finally, we'd like to thank our sponsors for this week, SBI Life Insurance, India Water Portal, and Jupiter, a digital banking app. Thank you so much for making this possible.
Hi, welcome back. We were talking about how water scarcity affects women disproportionately and how it is leading to girls dropping out of school, not getting the education they need. So, Meg, before the break, we were talking about girls in school. So, what other points or what other ways do you think that water scarcity is leading to sort of like this result that girls are dropping out and not able to go to school?
Yeah, of course. One of the reasons that we've discussed before is, of course, that responsibility of fetching water. But the other problem that girls face is at school. We know that we want to achieve maximum number of goals, a goal of maximum number of girls attaining education and going to school at least till a certain age. But we know that to ensure that, we need to have proper water and sanitation facilities in schools across the country. But realistically, we have not achieved that. There are a lot of schools which don't have washroom. There are a lot of schools which do not have proper water facilities. And that has been, of course, a source of worry. And it has also been a point of discussion across decades. But we know that more and more schools are building toilets for girls and separate toilets for girls and boys. But there are still there's still a huge percentage of schools which do not have those facilities, and that's why girls refrain from going to school, more particularly during their menstruation date, but also in general, because they have to face things like either they have to wait for their entire day to use the washroom and they cannot because there are no facilities at school. Also, on the other hand, they have no other alternative but just to go to open spaces and be involved in open defecation, and which also have these consequences that they have to meet with shame. There's embarrassment, of course, and there is also always a threat of sexual harassment by external people. And of course, so the best choice that they think for them is to stay at home. And that's how we observe that girls refrain from going from school because of water and sanitation issues. And sometimes even when there is an availability of toilets in school, they're not very clean, and we know that unclean or unhygienic toilets can lead to a lot of issues in girls. and they can suffer from UTI, urinary tract infections, and which of course acts against their regular attendance. They eventually choose to drop out or be absent throughout, and that's how they don't get the education they deserve.
So, make one important point that I would like to add. For instance, in a village which has like water scarcity, there is no water. Even if you build a toilet and it has no running water, it is of likely of no use. So, building toilets is definitely an obviously important step, but maintaining them and getting water to them is even an important part of the process.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
that I think depends a lot for a place which has in which people go 10 kilometers to fetch water. Nobody would be prioritizing toilets with running water in the village school or in that place's school. That is an
Harshit,
expectation.
there can be places which where people don't have to go and walk 10 kilometers to fetch water, but have sanitation
Yeah,
problems at schools.
yeah, that is definitely. But what I'm saying is, even if you make toilets, you will have to ensure water availability and water
Yeah, yeah.
availability for the place at as whole. Water security for the place as whole. Only then you can think of increasing. What our ultimate aim of like such a conversation is increasing female participation in schools. That I fully
Yeah,
agree.
that's true. And that's why, since it's not prioritized, and I'm not saying that water needs for other people are not important, I'm just saying for whatever reason, since these are not prioritized, girls end up dropping out from schools or being absent from school for days at a stretch, and which becomes a hurdle in their individual development.
Yeah, so like that is a very, if you look at it from a very realistic viewpoint, you will see that nobody will prioritize. It's not about maybe the school, nobody will prioritize the water supply to a toilet in a public space over water supply to people's home. So in places which suffer from extreme droughts, in which the problem of dropouts and female participation in schools is like very less. The problem is like quite large and the female participation is very less. You'll have to ensure availability for the whole place. So, for instance, the union government has consolidated all the schemes into a Ministry of Jal Shakti, and they plan to provide each rural household with safe tap drinking water by 2024. So, that is a noble goal to aspire for, and that will obviously help in the issue we are talking about. But that is sort of a very far away goal. And I think there needs to be talks on, you were talking about, for instance, about availability of infrastructure and availability of infrastructure in schools and sanitary washrooms and stuff like that. But I think we also need to work a lot. Even if we want to solve this problem of female dropout in school because of water scarcity, you will have to tackle the root cause. That is water scarcity.
Yes, definitely. It's water scarcity.
So agriculture, I think I read some reports. Agriculture somewhere around accounts for 85% of the water consumption on the country. And when you look at similar countries, who grow similar crops. For instance, you look at China, you look at other Southeast Asian countries, basically Vietnam, not Southeast Asian countries, other countries such as Vietnam or Cambodia, in areas which have, for instance, same water availability, and you compare it to areas with same water patterns like in India, you will see that we take more water to produce the same crops. Okay. And we also grow more water intensive crops. That is one of the reasons for that is
Mhm.
I think certain government policies, for instance, the minimum support price for water intensive crops. You should not give MSPs for rice in Punjab. And you should like,
Definitely. And I think that's why most rural parts of the country are suffering because of water crisis. Even in Punjab, Haryana, since there are a lot of water intensive crops being grown, the farmers at the end of the day are suffering. And it's the people from the regions which are facing the issue of water crisis. And that's one of the things that governments can look upon, and it can better manage the MSPs for these water intensive crops.
yes, so you all have to look at, and you have to only like support crops which do not consume such resources and which are like locally based. you should not be supporting crops which use a lot of water or are not ideal for that soil conditions, and people and the farmer has to put a lot of fertilizers in that setting, or that crop is like very sensitive to droughts. So all of those things have to be looked at. And groundwater is,
Yes.
the levels are dropping. So
Mhm.
what I've seen around me is that the Delhi government has had some success in water body rejuvenation. They are trying to convert like old lakes and dirty lakes into sort of catchment areas, and they're trying to revive them. They have had some success, and it is like super difficult nowadays, at least in the area where I live, to get to dig a borewell or to get to tap into the groundwater without the explicit permission of the government. So that is a good thing. And I think the level is slowly, I think it will rise, and maybe this will help a lot.
Yeah, and I think it again comes back to the point that we have to rejuvenate water. We have to get into practices such as rainwater harvesting. And that's only how we'll be able to maintain levels of groundwater, and we'll be able to serve water to as many people as possible. And since we have discussed all of the impacts that girls face and their education hurdles that they face due to water scarcity, I think that if we have to keep our girls in school and if we have to attain levels of literacy for girls across the country, we have to better manage our water crisis.
Yeah, it is like very important that you educate the female in the family, because she is the one that will be taking care of the family, at least according to what the cultural norms and the present family structure is in the country. And that will have a very large impact on the child's health, on their economic condition. So it's like very important to keep them in school.
Yeah, that's true.
So, Mehak, do you want to add something before we close?
I just want to add that water crisis is not a problem that can be solved in a day. It, of course, will take time, and we have to act upon as both short term and long term goals, and align into practices which will help us to better manage our water resources and provide water to as many people as possible. This might take decades, but I think if we have to get on a right track of educational development for all people, irrespective of gender, I think we have to better manage the crisis that we are facing and the crisis, water crisis that we are heading towards.
Yeah, I like that is quite a valid point, but I don't think we should take decades for something like water scarcity. I think a timeline in years would be a much better goal to aspire to. So, Meg, thank you for being here with us, and thank you, listeners, for joining in. Hope to see you in the next episode of All Things Policy.
Thank you so much.
If you liked our show, don't forget to check out other interesting podcasts on the IVM network. You can tune into them on the IVM Podcast app, ivmpodcast.com, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. You can also follow IVM on social media. The handle is at IVM Podcasts on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And hey, if you'd like to dive into Takshashila's research on technology, strategy, and economic affairs, check us out at our Twitter handle at Takshashila INST or our website takshashila.org.in.
Don't you think that if everyone around you is getting smart, you better be smarter? Hey there, I'm the traveling professor Siddharth Deshmukh, and I'm back with season 2 of my podcast to make you smarter. Smarter with Sid. What's this season's focus about? Well, it's about 10-minute nuggets that will make you stand out at work. It's time to go from smart to smarter. Tune in every Tuesday and Thursday and become smarter with Sid.
We face 100 dilemmas every day while raising our children and nurturing our families. Why not let science help us make informed decisions to solve our dilemmas? Hi, I'm Devi Shobha.
And I'm Meghna. We host Big Talk About Tiny Humans, where we will help you unpack challenges around parenting and your child's development.
And more importantly, we will equip you with research-backed strategies that you can readily act on.
Tune in to our podcast every Wednesday on the IBM Podcasts app, website, or your favorite podcast platforms.